If I was to give a title to this sermon, I'd probably call it The Grumpy Jesus. If you look at that text, Jesus is not very happy with anyone in this morning's gospel. And to understand why, we need to focus on one line. Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem. Jesus is now very determined to go to Jerusalem. He's determined to die on the cross. There's an urgency to his manner. Nothing is going to distract him from fulfilling that mission. But that doesn't mean that people around him aren't going to try to distract him. First, there is the matter of the Samaritan town that rejects him because he is determined to reach Jerusalem. You see, there was some bad blood between the Jews and the Samaritans that went all the way back to the time of the exile. The Samaritans were Israelites. They were from the tribe of Ephraim and Manasseh. But during the time of exile, when 10 tribes went into exile, those in the northern part of the kingdom, around Samaria, didn't go into exile. Instead, foreigners were given their land, and a bunch of foreigners moved in. Eventually, the Samaritans intermarried with these foreigners. So when the exile was over and all the Jews came back, the other 10 tribes came back, they wanted nothing to do with these Samaritans because they had married foreigners, and so their bloodline was now impure. There was another issue. The Jews and the Samaritans really didn't like each other. There was another issue too, though, and it's more relative to today's gospel. The Samaritans built a temple for themselves on Mount Gerizim, where they claimed that Moses designated that place as the proper place for the nation to worship. So Jesus comes along and he's headed for that other temple, the temple of Jerusalem, that the Samaritans want nothing to do with. He's headed for that other temple, so they don't want anything to do with him. How does Jesus respond to this rejection? He walks on. He is not going to get distracted by those old arguments between the Samaritans and the Jews. He is headed for the cross. He walks on. But James and John just won't let go of it. They say, "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" In other words, they want to burn down this Samaritan village because they were rude to Jesus. You can almost imagine Jesus turning his face away and rolling his eyes, because these guys just don't get it, do they? The Prince of Peace does not go around burning down villages. But maybe we need to give James and John a break. They considered Jesus to be a great prophet. Their expectations of Jesus are built on their understanding of the past great prophets. Prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Elijah. We've been hearing the story of Elijah for the last few Sundays from our Old Testament lessons. Today we hear about Elijah passing on the mantle to Elisha, as Elijah is taken away in a whirlwind and a chariot of fire. Last week, we heard about a very depressed Elijah who is hiding in a cave and is telling God to just take his life. And in that version, Elijah is looking for God in the whirlwind. He's looking for God in the earthquake. And he finds God in his still small voice. Here is how the Reverend Nils Chittenden, a chaplain of the Episcopal Center at Duke University, here's how he summarizes what's happening with Elijah. Much earlier in Elijah's story, he had challenged the pagan prophets of Baal to a competition atop Mount Carmel to see which of their respective deities was the more powerful. And his story is equally full of impressive special effects as today's, in which the pagan gods were crushed. The triumphant Elijah orders the massacre of all 450 of the prophets of Baal. After all this spilt blood, Elijah falls into a depression and hides in a cave. No doubt there were functional reasons for his dejection and his hiding, since there was probably a price on his head, but there was more to it than that. "Enough, O Lord," Elijah says, "take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." Remarkably, this is nothing less than Elijah's conversion. He had set his God Yahweh in competition with the gods of Baal, but all Elijah had achieved by this was to put himself on the same level as the pagan prophets he claimed to despise. The contest on Mount Carmel had merely ended up being a show of strength between rival shamans. Elijah had spent his life seeking God in the earthquakes, the winds, and the fire, but had eventually found him in the still small voice. In his book, Faith Beyond Resentment, the Roman Catholic theologian James Allison calls Elijah's dark night of the soul as his undeceiving. His realization that what set his God apart from all the others was not that he was more muscular, but that he was, in fact, the very antithesis of all that. So James and John seem to prefer the earlier, fiery Elijah, and that's how they want Jesus to be. They don't want the later version who finds God in a still small voice. So they are rebuked by Jesus. But then the distractions keep coming. One man wants to follow Jesus. Jesus senses the man's really looking for fame and fortune. So he tells the man, "Follow me and you'll be a homeless wanderer." And then Jesus moves on. Another man wants to follow Jesus, but first he wants to bury his father. "Let the dead bury the dead," Jesus says over his shoulder as he moves on. Another wants to return home to say goodbye to his family, and Jesus said to him, "No one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God." And then Jesus moves on, headed for Jerusalem. Jesus is determined. He does not give in to any of the distractions that come his way. He knows the importance of the events that are looming in the future. He knows that his death and his resurrection are going to change everything. Nothing is going to distract him from his mission. Distractions. I don't know about you, but I think sometimes I hunt out distractions on purpose. In my bedroom and living room, I have a radio on, both rooms, on the same station. So I can move around the house and listen to the radio. In the garage, I have a radio on a different station because I have my exercise equipment out there. I don't use the exercise equipment a whole lot, but I like to go out there and look at it and imagine I'm losing weight by looking at fancy exercise equipment. But I do have a different radio station on in the garage. And then, of course, in the den, I've got my big TV, plus I've got my laptop with earphones where I'm watching videos as I'm watching a movie and listening to the radio from the other room. To me, that's normal. Sherry cannot stand it when she comes up for the weekend. She shuts everything off. And then I can't stand the silence. So I think, some people, some personalities like all those distractions, and we actually create them if they're not there. Let's listen to the Reverend Nils Chittenden about distractions for just a little bit. In this day and age, distractions abound like mushrooms in a damp, dark basement. Far from avoiding them, we appear to seek them out. The term multitasking doesn't seem to have any negative connotations. In fact, we tend to view the ability to do more than one thing at a time as a virtue. Texting during a meeting? Sure, why not? Checking Facebook at a dinner party? Why, yes, doesn't everyone? It persuades the people around us that we have full, busy, important lives. Most probably, we persuade ourselves too. We flip from one shiny thing to another, wowed by things that are sleeker, faster, bigger, and higher. And that also is precisely the point. There are so many distractions, so many diversions, but each of these conspire to take our minds off the ball. Faced with a bewildering array of choices, we can easily become unfocused and lose our single-mindedness. We lose our single-mindedness. We forget to keep the main thing the main thing. So what is the main thing? St. Paul summed it up pretty well in Galatians. Love your neighbor as yourself. More to the point, here's the main thing from the Gospel of Mark, the 12th chapter. And one of the scribes came up and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that he answered them well, asked him, which commandment is the most important of all? Jesus answered, the most important is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. Love God, love your neighbor. That's the main thing. Our mission is to proclaim the good news of God's love for every person, and to make that proclamation with our every word and our every deed. Let us not become distracted. Amen.
Amen.